you know he's on top. Million subs, he never gonna flop. Out of Chicago, where the streets don't sleep. Betting on games, making cash real deep. Crystal ball for sports, he knows the lines. He's a sports aficionado, the money he finds. From football to basketball, he's always on point. Predicting winners never disappoints. He's got that hustle, that Chicago vibe. Making moves on the streets, cash on the side. With E, you know it's always a bet. He's the king of the game, never forget.
Hello and welcome to the Etoft21Sports Show for July 23rd. How is everyone doing? My name is Erik. I'm the man behind Etoft21Sports. Absolutely loaded episode for you today. My boy Gino from the That's What G Said podcast is coming on, and we are going to talk about the NFC West, give you a betting preview for that, share what bets you need to make, give you some fantasy football advice. As always, the Etoft21 Sports Show is presented by Parlay Play. If you're not using the Parlay Play app, go to the App Store, download the Parlay Play app, use promo code NFL Betting Blitz for a nice little deposit bonus. Right away, we're going to jump into the fantasy football spotlight. The player in the fantasy football spotlight this week is Puka Nacua. ADP of 10 and wide receiver 7 per Fantasy Pros. That means he's being drafted in the first round. One thing I always say with betting and fantasy football is you don't want to chase. If you're drafting Puka, that is what you're doing. You're chasing what he did last year. Looking at the numbers, all of his production was done with no Cooper Kupp. Without Kupp, 11.6 targets a game, 114.2 yards per game, and 22.84 fantasy points per game. When Kupp played, that production dropped down to 8.6 targets per game, 76.25 yards per game, and 15.3 fantasy points per game. Nacua is not even the number one wide receiver on the Rams, and he's being drafted in the first round. What exactly am I missing? Now, look, if you want to draft him, that's fine, but I'm not going to draft him in the first round, and you can't make the argument you should draft him in case Kupp goes down. He's the wide receiver 2 on his team. And that is why I am fading Puka Nacua in fantasy football this year. And that is why he is in the fantasy football spotlight. Now, let's shift our attention over to the NFC West and welcome this week's guest from That's What G Said podcast, Gino, to the show. Gino, how you doing today, my man?
Good. I'm rocking my Rammies gear right here. I got my Mookie Betts on dad duty hat, so I'm all LA'd out, ready to talk some NFC West with you. And it's an interesting division because you and I think over the last few years, we've been kind of against San Francisco when it comes to winning the Super Bowl, like sometimes thinking they may have been a little bit overvalued because when they beat teams, they crush them. Right? They're kind of like one of those bullies that beats up on everyone. So I'm really intrigued to talk about this division because you got to start at the top with San Francisco returning from the Super Bowl. I mean, they're one of the most talented teams in the league, but I think each year you and I, our goal is to try to find those teams that are maybe supposed to win every single game and pick little reasons why they won't.
It's a fun division. I have a couple teams that I'm intrigued by. Right away, we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the Cardinals. Cardinals, 100-1 to win the Super Bowl, 50-1 to win the NFC, 13-1 to win the NFC West. To make the playoffs, they're plus 300, no, minus 400. Over under is 6.5. What say you about the Arizona Cardinals?
So last year, they had the lowest graded defense in the league. They ranked second from the bottom in scoring defense, 25th in yards allowed. They drafted 6 defensive players in the draft. They added a defensive lineman, Robinson, in round 1. They brought in Murphy Bunting from free agency to help the secondary. So they should be just a little bit better there, even if they maybe struggle out of the gate towards the end of the year and into next year with all those young draft picks. They should just have more talent out there than they did previously. Marvin Harrison Jr. obviously going to be a big help to Kyler Murray. James Conner still carrying the ball quite a bit. Trey McBride. So they have some solid skill position players. I think they'll be a little bit more fun and a little more well-rounded overall. There's an interesting late flyer, maybe someone that you just take at the very end of your draft. If you've already picked Connor, their rookie running back pass catcher, Benson, he'd be someone that could be interesting because if this team is down in a lot of games, you could see a lot of, needing to catch the ball late, a lot of times where he's in on those drives where you're just looking for more of a pass catcher. Keep in mind, Connor missed, I think, 4 games last year, 4 games the year before. I don't think Connor's ever played more than 15 games. So it is nice to maybe have a handcuff for him if you're going to go in that direction. Their offensive line was really bad last year, though, Erik. They did show some improvement towards the end of the year. In particular, the young guy, Paris Johnson Jr., he did not allow a sack or a hit in his final 3 games. So I do think their roster is going to be better. They were kind of feisty last year, too. Even early in the year, we were a little impressed with their coaching staff and just how they were getting some of these guys to punch up and to overachieve a little bit. But I still go through their roster, and this is one of those teams that I still think at this point you have a hard time circling a bunch of wins or circling wins on the road, maybe, right? Like this is the team that you can see, can they beat teams when teams come to play them and maybe have a disadvantage, or maybe teams come in and don't think that they're going to be having to deal with much. But I still can't get really past maybe 6 wins with this team, Erik. Overall, I just have to see a little bit more because they have a really difficult start to the season. They could lose their first 3 games, right? Mm-hmm. Possibly they play at Buffalo, then the Rams, then Detroit. So that week 2 game against the Rams, home against the Rams, that's just like a massive game for them for their season. Because you go down 0-3 right away, all of a sudden your team, your fan base, the energy all around your franchise is just checked out again. So many teams don't come back from when you're 0-3. But if they can just, after week 2, can they beat the Rams in week 2? And then they're 1-1, and you get the guys to believe a little bit more, a little bit longer into the season. You've got Detroit and Washington. Those are both home games. So all of a sudden you have 2 more games at home coming in where you don't have to go anywhere. Positives where they're going, positives what they're doing. Maybe my wager or my play for this team would be keeping an eye on Benson and someone that I would use in some DFS stuff and someone that I would handcuff, especially if I picked Connor.
I agree 100% with that. When we look at them last year, running the ball, they finished with the 4th most rushing yards from last season, and they were 2nd in yards per rush. With the addition of Williams and Brown, plus Johnson, as you mentioned, getting that 2nd year improvement, 2nd year jump, I think this running game is going to be in line. I think it makes absolute sense to draft Connor and then handcuff him with Benson, because Connor missed, what did he miss? 4 games last year, and he still finished as RB 18. It's going to be a good backfield and something that can help you in terms of fantasy football, getting a championship. When I was looking at their target share last year, tight end 32% of the time last year was their target. Was that because they had no true number 1 wide receiver, or the system that they're in now? Murray historically has targeted the wide receiver ones. During his time at Arizona wide receivers had the 3rd lowest targets last year in the NFL. When I kind of look at it and see there's no one else there, Murray's history of targeting number 1 wide receivers, to me, it just makes sense to take Marvin Harrison plus 600 to be rookie of the year. Look, if there was no Caleb Williams, he would be the betting favorite here. I really think Caleb Williams is a little overhyped in Chicago. We're getting good value on Marvin Harrison. Also, they play fast. This stat jumped out to me too. No Kingsbury there, but they were still 8th in pace last season. D-line was bad. They were terrible against the run last season, allowing the 4th most yards in the league, and had the 3rd fewest sacks. Active in the free agent market and in the draft and addressing this need, I think they're going to be better than they'd been last season. Secondary, I think, is going to take a huge step forward. Baker is back. As you mentioned, they added Murphy Bunting in free agency, and
Melton they drafted, right? Yeah. So, I mean, just by the sheer talent they have on the defensive side, they have to be better than they were last year defensively. They have so many more bodies out there of guys, young, old, whatever. And at the end of the year, if they stay healthy, that's how I'm going to play this team. because this could be a young team that, from the middle of the season on, like after their bye week, because they have a late bye, which could be a little frustrating for them, if they're struggling early. But post bye, could they be the type of team that, late in the year strings a few wins together? I mean, they have games against the Rams and the 49ers at the end of the year. Not sure what the 49ers might need at that point of the season. They come out of the bye with games on the road at Seattle, at Minnesota. Not easy to go on the road, but not games that you're thinking we have no chance against that team. Right. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to look towards this team, Erik, to probably start to play it and ride them a little bit later in the year as they continue to improve. But this will be a team I have no problem playing as a big underdog a lot throughout the year. I think they will be able to cover and probably have a positive ATS number at the end of the season, just because I still think there's this kind of thought and reputation that this team is like so bad and they're one of the worst teams in the league. And maybe they end up win-loss wise like that. But I do think they're more competent than a team that's just a doormat out on the field. So I don't think they're that bad. I can't quite get to a bunch of wins for them yet. They'll be more of a team I'm playing ATS this year.
See, how I look at them is I think you get the nail on the head. I think they're going to start out 0-2. Week 3, when the Lions come to town, to me, that's an absolute hammer spot. I'm going to be betting the Cardinals in that game plus the points. And I think they're going to win it. Right now, they're plus 300 to make the playoffs. After they lose the first 2 games, which I project them to, they're going to Buffalo, then they have the Rams at home. That's when I'll take them at probably like a plus 550, plus 600 to make the playoffs, just to get better odds. Pre-flop at plus 300, that's just not it for me. The potential's there on paper. I kind of got to see those first 2 games. If I see the things I like and they lost it, and I can get the 550, I like it. Week 8, Miami has Buffalo on deck. Week 10, Jets are going to be on a short rest. Week 14, they're playing Seattle. That's Seattle's 3rd road game in 4 weeks. And then week 18, you mentioned it, Niners could be resting players. The week before the Niners play the Lions, those 2 teams on paper are the best 2 teams in the NFL, the betting favorites, the NFC. So that game could determine the 1 seed. If that game determines the 1 seed, they could easily rest players, and that could be a spot where he could bet back Arizona,
And they have a pretty straightforward schedule, which is what you want for a team that is going to be an underdog in a lot of situations. Like they play one Monday and everything else is on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So they're going to be able to get their routine like week in, week out. And that's sort of what you want for a young team, right? Because we were talking about Kansas City last week, and it's like, man, they play on 5 or 6 different days of the week this year. And they're veteran, and maybe that doesn't impact them as much, but there are going to be weeks where they're going to get like no practice, or everything's different. And so for a lot of young guys, 6 guys they just drafted on the defensive side, for those guys, it's nice for them to know, hey, here's what we do. Sunday we play, Monday we'll watch film. Tuesday we start to ramp things up. Wednesday's like our real big practice day, right? Thursday, to know what that system is, because otherwise it can get confusing for a young team when you're all over the place like that. So maybe they get an extra win or 2 just because they don't have a lot of chaos in their schedule. It's very simple for them. It's very straightforward. They're not playing on a bunch of different random holidays, Tuesday here, Wednesday here, Thursday here. So feisty, not ready to go all in on them for any type of a future yet, but I would not be shocked if you and I are talking about this team a lot this year as a team that we're playing because they're plus 7.5 or plus 10.5, right? Or plus 14.5. And we got them to that magic number that we wanted.
Yeah. I think this team has huge value. This is going to be definitely a team I'm looking to bet. Week 3, I already have that game circled. I'll be taking them probably right off of openers. Next team we're going to talk to, we're going up north. We're going to Seattle. Seattle is 65-1 to win the Super Bowl, 28-1 to win the NFC, 7-1 to win the NFC West, to make the playoffs, plus 180. Yes, no, minus 220. Over under of 7.5. What do you think about the good old Seattle Seahawks?
Well, it's sort of tough to know what they're going to be, right? Because they have a brand new head coach and 3 coordinators who have never held their current positions at the NFL level. So what type of philosophy will they have? This is not the Pete Carroll Seahawks that we've known. So that's a big, real starting point, like scheme, depth chart, all those sorts of things. Former Ravens defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, he's been their D coordinator the last couple of years. Youngest head coach in the league. He's only 36 years old. So we have the youngest coach in the league just replaced the oldest coach in the league. So that'll be a real dynamic shift for them too. You get new offensive coordinator who comes in from Washington. So he was the guy that was coaching Penix over the last couple of years, where they averaged 37.7 points per game. Penix, Adunze. They didn't run the ball much there, but he has said he won't be as pass happy. He plans to use fewer pre-snap motions and shifts, wants to put a lot of responsibility on the quarterback. And that's really where they're going to come down to, I think. Where do you think Geno Smith stacks up as a starting quarterback in this league? For a lot of us, we probably, what Gino has said, we probably wrote him off. And then he probably leveled himself up a place that most of us thought he wasn't. We probably all thought he was a backup quarterback. And then he proved, you know what? He is a starter, but to what level, right? And this is what we see when you have guys like a Jimmy G when they were with San Francisco. It's even harder when you have a guy like Geno Smith, who I think is capable on a good day of being a very good NFL quarterback, but I just don't know if he's a guy who can be the Super Bowl quarterback that leads you all the way. And when you don't have all of the pieces around him, those flaws you can see a little bit more. Like major weakness for them last year, pass protection. So then he struggles more when you can't protect him, right? Like he's not able to make other stuff happen as much as a top 5 or top 10 quarterback might be able to do that. They had real struggles. So they drafted 3 offensive linemen. They added 2 more in free agency. They have a rookie defensive tackle, Byron Murphy, the second. They want this guy to be a centerpiece of their defense moving forward. And that's, what level of play do we expect from Geno? Awesome 2022. Okay, maybe slightly below average 2023. 9-8 each of the last 2 years. To me, they have to improve on a couple things. They were 23rd in third down conversion rate on offense. They were 30th on defense. That means they're not getting third downs and they're allowing everybody else to pick up their third downs. You're just not going to win a lot of games when those are when those are some of the stats on the margins there. So you have to be better executing. And maybe that's where the new coordinators, younger staff can do that, right? Because I love Pete Carroll. I'm a USC guy, but Pete Carroll did have sort of a methodology, right? He was an older coach. He had a way of going, and maybe new scheming can help them out. I don't know. I'm not completely negative on them, but I think that their over-under is probably pretty accurate. Like, I think they're right around a 7-win team or so. I can't really see them getting into 10. I don't think they're so bad that they're like a 3-win team, but I just think they're right in that range. Like, I probably wouldn't play them to make the playoffs. I don't really trust Geno Smith all that much. Like, if I were to rank him with the quarterbacks, it'd probably be like after the 18 range, like a little below average, and then, 18 through 30, right in that stretch. So I go through their schedule. Maybe they can win week 1 against Denver. I think that's a week that Geno Smith probably circles with a lot of what happened with Wilson and them. And then they got to go on the road in week 2 to New England. And New England may not be great, but that's a road game. That's not an easy place to play. And then you got to come home and you play, right? And then you got to come home and you play Miami. And then you got to go at Detroit. So right off the bat, I mean, if you're 1-3, that's probably going to be a tough spot for them to be in. So the one guy, I guess, skill position wise, a lot of people are hoping for that step forward this year is the wide receiver, Jackson, right? The big guy who, but you still wonder with the 3 wide receivers they have, is he someone that can be valuable every week? Or is it like, hey, this might be his week because he's got a better matchup. This might be a Lockett week. He kind of has to usurp Lockett because we know Metcalf is there, right? So I'm wondering if there's enough there for him. Like, I'm intrigued with him, but this is a team that I'm very curious, but I have to take probably a really big wait and see approach with them because of what I was saying about their coordinators and just not really knowing what to expect from a lot of their new coaches.
Grubb, who was the OC at Washington last season, is making the jump to the NFL. You kind of mentioned it. This isn't going to be the Seahawks that we're used to seeing. They're going to be playing a lot more 4, even 5 wide receiver sets. The big thing is, and you were kind of talking about it before, do they trust Smith to run this offense? Also, will a defensive coach let them run it? Historically, defensive coaches are old school, run the football, control the clock, keep the defense off the field. This offense, like they ran in Washington, fast. Will McDonald let them do it? That's a huge question. Honestly wouldn't surprise me if we see Sam Howell be the starter by the time the season ends. Grubb and DeBoer work together at Washington. This is going to be the first time that Grubb has not been with DeBoer. DeBoer went to Alabama. Grubb was supposed to follow him to Alabama. Then he got this job and he elected to stay in the Pacific Northwest. And this is going to be his first time kind of like calling the plays. He helped design plays with DeBoer, but this is going to be his first time with the headset on. How is that going to go? One of the golden rules of this offense is don't take sacks. If you're going to get sacked or you feel the pressure coming, just throw it up to the X wide receiver. They're going to be lining up. One of the key concepts of this offense is a lot of 3 wide receiver sets to one side and the X wide receiver all by himself. I mentioned throwing up to the X. Who's the X wide receiver? DK Metcalf. We looked at Oduzze, what the big season he had. That was because of the system he was in. I'm expecting a huge season from DK Metcalf. I think he's going to be the number 1 wide receiver. I think he's going to lead them in pretty much everything. His over-under right now is 1,500. I think he flies over that. So I'm going to bet DK Metcalf over 1,500 yards. Also, with historically how much the X wide receiver produces in this offense, right now, he is 43-1 to lead the league in wide receiving yards. Defense has some questions, so I'm going to take DK Metcalf 43-1 to have the most wide receiving yards in the NFL this season. You mentioned their offensive line. You need Lucas and Cross to make that third-year jump. Wouldn't surprise me if Hayes, who they drafted in the 3rd round, will be the starter sooner rather than later. They really don't have a dominant pass rusher, hence the hire of Dirty from the Cowboys, who has a history of developing pass rushers. This defense, it's a complete change of what they're used to doing. They're going to need time to develop, and they really don't have the pieces. Back 4 on paper, yes, it is good, but these are guys that like to play zone. McDowell, likes to play a lot of man, and I worry about these DBs having enough foot speed to play man-to-man. And when we look at football, the one thing I like about football is it's like the game of wrist. You have a strategy, and that's what you do. And the players have to fit your strategy. You may have players that do A, B, C, D, but your strategy is X, Y, Z, and it's just not a good mix. You got to find that, and that's the analogy I have with this backfield. They do A, B, C. The system is X, Y, Z. So I think you're going to be able to throw on this back 4. That's another reason why I like DK Metcalf, because if you're throwing on this back 4, what's that going to lead to? You being down and having to throw more. So I'm really big in DK Metcalf this year. Some situational spots I noticed. Week 3, Miami extended rest. Week 5, Giants are on extended rest, and Seahawks have the Niners on deck. Could be a spot where you get the Giants, who are going to be a little bit undervalued, I think, this year. Week 8, Bills' 4th road game in 5 weeks. Ooh. That's going to be a spot because that line will be a little bit inflated. Week 9, they have your boys, the Rams, on extended rest. Week 13, the Jets are off a bye, but they do have Miami on deck. And then week 15, and there's a lot of these this year that I've noticed when I've been doing this. There's a lot of teams that have 3 games in 18 days. Week 15, Packers, third game in 18 days. One thing I've kind of listened a little bit, and I usually don't listen to these podcasts of former players. I've listened to a little bit of Chris Long stuff because I've kind of seen it on TikTok, and he's been pretty adamant about how these short rest games, when they add up, how your body just can't get it going for that third game. So I really think there's going to be value on fading the Packers that week and taking the Seahawks. And then week 16, the Vikings, who I think are going to be one of the worst teams in the league. They're on short rest. But Seattle, I think, is going to be a fun team. A lot of DK Metcalf overs for me to start the season. And hopefully, he'll have a good year and we get that yardage prop and the 43-1 to lead the league in rushing home.
Let's go over DK.
Next team, we're talking about your Rams, 30-1 to win the Super Bowl, 15-1 to win the NFC, plus 330 to win the NFC West, to make the playoffs, even money, to not make the playoffs, minus 120, over under 8.5. What do you say about the Rams house, my friend?
This is one that's really interesting because I think the Rams roster overall this year is better than they were last year. But I don't know if they're going to win as many games, right? It's one of those things where I actually think they're like a more well-rounded team this year. Even though they lost Donald, I think they'll have some other pieces defensively to help. Some of their young guys offensively will be a little bit better. So I like a lot of what they have overall. I don't think they have the easiest schedule in the world, though. And that's what's concerning to me. I mean, just right away, jumping into their schedule, they have a stretch where they play starting on Sunday, November the 3rd. They go at Seattle, divisional road game. They come home and play Miami. Then they go at New England. So you go from Seattle, home, then to the opposite side of the country to New England. Then you come home and you play Philly. You go at New Orleans. You play Buffalo, at the 49ers, and at the Jets. I know you and I both probably will talk about the Jets and maybe not being as high on them as others, but that stretch of games is not easy. They could lose any one of those games. Like, that's what scares me about playing this team, anything season-wide. Because if you're looking at this division and you're trying to okay, hey, I'm going to put a few bucks and I'm going to bet on every division. But I'm going to try to not bet on the favorite in each division because I'm just betting $10, and I want to have a little fun. Like, this would be the team that you would think, okay, yeah, they make sense to be the team to bet. Because I don't think Arizona is there yet. I don't think Seattle is there yet. But gosh, I mean, this schedule is just not easy. It really isn't. I mean, right off the bat, they start out at Detroit. They could lose that game. They go at Arizona. We're talking about how that's going to be a huge game for Arizona. They're home early on in the year. They're going to really want to win that game. Then they got to go play. Then they play at home against San Francisco, but the 49ers have historically beaten them up. Yep. All of a sudden, if you're 1-2 or 0-3, then you got to go at Chicago, right? I mean, so that's what I'm a little bit worried about, Erik. Now, schedule-wise, I'm worried. Let's get into some of the positives. They were inside the top 10 in all offensive grades last year except for pass protection. So they were very well-rounded. Stafford had a great year. Puka came out of nowhere, and the receivers were good with him and Kupp. The backs were fantastic with Kyren Williams. So they were good there. Williams led NFL in rushing yards per game with 95.3. Puka set the NFL rookie record. 5 games with at least 150 yards from scrimmage. 7 games with at least 100 receiving yards. So they draft Blake Corum. They should have a good 1-2 punch in their running back room. Aaron, last year they ranked dead last in team coverage. So they drafted a safety in the 3rd round. They bring in Darius Williams. They bring in Tre'Davious White to hopefully sure up some of that. Aaron Donald retires, so they need Kobe Turner to have another big year. He had 12 sacks last year. They drafted defensive linemen Verse and Fisk with their first 2 picks. They drafted 4 defensive linemen overall to try to fill the void of Donald there. And the one thing that I've been reading, and just like you do, you read and look at some of the blogs and some of the training camp stuff from the beat reporters and the beat writers. And it seems like this year they're just way ahead of schedule compared to where they were last year. Because remember, they had 44 rookies last year on their team. So they had to go through everything in slow motion. All the training camp stuff, all the walkthrough stuff, all their practice stuff. They're like teaching 44 people how to do this for the first time. Now all those rookies, they know what they're doing the second time around. So they don't have to baby them through all of the offseason stuff, through all the drills. This is a team that I'm really, because obviously I'm a fan of, but I think you and I try to, if I'm going to gamble, I have to put what I feel as a fan aside when I'm going to make a gamble. Do I always want the Rams to win? Absolutely. But do I think it's logical to tell all of you here to go bet the Rams over under 8.5? I'm not sure. Would I still say that the Rams are probably the most logical team to bet to win the division if you were not going to bet the 49ers? Yeah. I'd say if the 49ers don't win the division, it's probably the Rams that do. But I just have a hard time getting there with the schedule on paper, Erik. How do you feel about my Rammies this year?
Real quick, sports facts. Rams aren't making the playoffs. Let's make some money. Did you see your boy Colin had Stafford as the 5th best quarterback in the league? Where do you guys have him?
I think he's become underrated. Like last year, if you were just looking at the stats, like he had a fantastic year. He was really accurate. His passing grade was really good. I think 5 to 10 feels right for Stafford. What would you say? Like below 5, but above 10.
I'm jotting people's names down. Obviously, I have him behind Allen, Burrow, and Mahomes.
Yeah,
brainers.
Me too. But then after that, you're having conversations, right? Like he's
after least that. You can kind of talk about stuff. Lamar. I think we're going to see a different Jalen Hurts this year in the Kellen Moore offense. Lamar, can't. And I'm not really that high on Lamar in terms of.
And then what do you go with like a young guy? People probably put Stroud up because he had such a great.
I'd rather have Stafford than Stroud.
Absolutely,
honestly.
Me too. And I'd rather have and when it comes down to, we're tied in the fourth quarter and you've got one drive. I think if you said he's top 5, I have no problem with that. Like if you said he was 4th or 5th, just behind the guys that you've mentioned, because he is a guy that we've seen do it in the Super Bowl. Right? We've seen him do it at the highest level. The drives, a couple of them that he's had with the Rams in the playoffs were unbelievable just to get to the Super Bowl, the one against the 49ers to get there. He's proven clutch. I wouldn't say number 1, number 2, number 3. Once you got past the top 3 or 4, I think he could be in the conversation. I think if you got to 10 and he wasn't mentioned, that would be way, way, way too low.
Yeah, I'm just I wonder who else was. Herbert. Herbert needs to start winning.
Herbert's bet got everything you want on paper, right? But Herbert's sort of the opposite. He's not been clutch at all when they needed him to be. It's like really bad in the clutch. A guy like Tua, I would absolutely take Stafford over in a million years over someone like Tua.
Take him over Goff. I'd take him over Rodgers. Take him over Dak. I'm trying to think who else. I take him over Stroud. Take him over Lawrence. Take him over Richardson. Take him over Levis. Take him over Watson. Take Lawrence. Him over Russell. Take him not Burrow. Lamar's 50-50. I take
Dak.
him over
I'm taking him over Dak.
Yeah, if you're basing it on who you want your quarterback to be for the last drive. Yeah.
Because the conversations are different, right? Like, we're not going to go draft him number 1 overall in the NFL draft right now because of his age, right? Yeah. And, he doesn't have years ahead. But if you need one game and you've got all the quarterbacks lined up healthy for that one game or, like we said, the one drive. Right? I'm absolutely going to put him in that right about 5, 6 in that range.
If I have one drive, he would probably be the 5th quarterback on my list. That's what I think.
He can make so many throws that I don't think people give him credit for because of his arm strength. Like he can, when you're an offensive coordinator, like with the Rams now, they can unlock things in their playbook that other quarterbacks you can't even attempt because he doesn't have the arm strength to make that throw and hit that 20-yard down and out like that. And that's what is nice about having him. He just opens your playbook up. He's not
100%.
fast, but he's not a slow quarterback. So for a guy that's not a runner, he's about as good of a quarterback that can check all of the boxes that you want. Like he can make all the throws. And that's what you're looking for. These guys that don't really have very many weaknesses as a thrower. Someone like Lamar, he may have some weaknesses as a thrower, but then obviously like his running ability gives him a little bit of a boost, right? Same maybe with like a Josh Allen that gives them the escapability there late in a game. But yeah, Stafford's one of those players that you respect him a lot more once he's on your team and you see him week in, week out, and you're like, man, I think this guy's a lot better than I ever had thought before.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Big news with the Rams is obviously how are they going to handle Donald retiring? Will Young, the rookie for last year, get 8 sacks? Of course, he's not going to get it. A lot of those were because Donald was demanding so much respect. It's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do when teams are actually focusing on him. They drafted Fisk and Verse, who I really like. I think those are 2 great draft picks, but they're young and they're going to be replacing one of the greats. So obviously, with that being said, defensive line going to take a step backwards.
Yep.
Donald was able to band-aid the secondary issues with the pressure he created. I think that quarterbacks are going to be able to pick apart this back four because I really don't think it's that good. I think Donald was able to hide it because he made quarterbacks go through the progression. The Rams aren't able to get any pass rush. That's going to be a big issue for them stopping the pass. They made a big switch last year in the running game. And in simple terms, it would be zone run, zone run, zone run. And then they just do a power gap run just right up the middle. And that's where Kyron Williams was just eating. Now, after a whole year, how are teams going to adjust? Because last year, this was kind of a new thing, whole year on tape. How are we going to see teams adjust? Or is there a new wrinkle that McVay is going to pull out on this? Kyron Williams was a beast last season, but you don't take Blake Corum in the 3rd round if he's going to be your bell cow. So obviously you mentioned it. It's going to be a split backfield. I think we're going to see Williams' production drop because of that. I'd be very leery of drafting him in the fantasy football drafts. I know people want to make Puka a thing this year, but we need to look at his numbers. With no Cup, 11.7 targets, 114 yards, and a 31% target share. When Cup played, 8.7 targets per game, 76.25 yards per game, and only a 27% target share. Numbers don't lie. Unless Cup gets hurt, we're not going to have a huge season from Puka. Made a great signing this offseason. Got Jonah Jackson from my Lions to shore up that left side. O-line will be better than it's been in a couple years, which is absolutely huge.
For Stafford, right?
For them, because
just keeping him healthy.
Upright and everything. On paper, they look really good. But I really feel the loss of Donald is going to be too much for this team to really make any noise. I think they're an intriguing team. If Donald was there, I'd probably be investing in them to make a Super Bowl. Because when you kind of look at the stuff, like you put down, okay, 2 good wide receivers, good running back, improved offensive line, Super Bowl winning quarterback. Those are things you can get behind. Those are the attributes you want when you're looking to take a future on the team. But then they lost a Hall of Fame defensive lineman. So you know what I mean? Like
it's not, and like, well, everything what we've seen with the Rams over the last few years is you're hitting it right on the nail on the head. Like they do a good job of making sure the roster and the team is pretty well balanced overall. But because of the way they've had to operate with a lot of top tier talent, they don't have any depth. So as soon as guys start getting hurt and they're top tier talent, they just don't have the reserves at all. And that's sort of the problem that they're in. Like you're like what you're hitting at. Like on paper, yeah, that you're looking at like, okay, what are their real weaknesses? Maybe the D line because they lost Donald. On paper for them, they feel like they did as best a job as they could of filling in a few other guys to try to fill that hole. No one's ever going to be able to do what Donald did, but at least they tried to do the best that they could. They got a couple guys for the secondary, but will it all come together? They also overachieved a little bit last year. You know, they had a really good stretch down the year where they won 7 out of 8 games. And just a lot of times, like when you're a team that's not that good, the balls don't usually bounce your way 7 out of 8 weeks, right? So I have a hard time seeing them being that much more than a 500 team here. Like I had them at 9 wins at the most. Like I cannot get to double digits with them. Like, and that's right what their over under is. And that's the problem, is that it's not like I'm so convinced one way or the other where I feel like I'm all in with them. Like, is this the type of a team where like if early on San Francisco's regressing and then maybe they don't look this like that, or maybe they get a couple injuries, they trade Ayuk and then one of their Debo gets hurt and they're looking like someone's got to win every division, right? So if some of the other teams start not looking great, maybe you can get in on the Rams as just being a little bit better than some of the rest. But yeah, they look to me like a 500 team and maybe they could get into the playoffs. And then if you do, you feel like we've got a experienced quarterback. We've got a coach that's been there. Maybe we can win a couple, right? We just want to get, they're the type of team that they just want to get to the playoffs. Like for them, that's a solid year. And now we've got now we have a chance. And
with Stafford and McVay, you know, you're going to have a chance, you know,
they're going to be in that wild card range. Like, I just don't think they're a division winner. I think they're a couple games worse than the 49ers, most likely. And they're probably just like we said, like last year, they're battling for that one of those final wild card spots.
And when you look at the picture of the NFC, I mean, I think the Cowboys are going to regress. I think they're going to take a huge step backward. I think the Eagles are legit. Anyone else in that division, and Giants, intriguing. Commanders, intriguing. But I don't think they're going to be at that level to compete for a playoff spot. When we look at the South is going to be a 9-8,
almost for sure one, and then the North will have maybe a couple, right? Maybe Green Bay or Detroit, right? You'll have.
I'll be honest, I'm not high on Green Bay. Like,
and that's what I mean. Like, so all of and I think sometimes these are the conversations that people don't have, right? They'll look at a team and be like, "Oh, they're not going to make the playoffs." But then what did we just do? Like, who are the 8 teams that you're going to pencil in? For sure, right? Or the like
everything on paper. I mean, if you have questions about one of the teams in the North, that's going to open stuff up for the Rams,
right? That's
because somebody else in the West to make the playoffs. I just feel that a lot of people chased last year. We need to remember that was last year. Last year is
absolutely.
Last year. This year is this year.
Especially when you're really good towards the end of the year. Right? Because you feel like the momentum doesn't carry over very much. No. Unless you're like a really young team and you like start to figure things out, then maybe that can kind of build up some confidence. But yeah, I mean, this is a totally different season. Aaron Donald's not here. Totally different teams. And you're going to start on the road playing a really emotional game against the Lions and Goff, you know, right off the bat. That's going to be a fun Sunday night football game.
You have 3 road games in 4 weeks to start the season.
To start.
So, I mean, they could be 0-3, 1-3. Then we can get a little value on them to make the playoffs. Yep. I feel like they're kind of like the Cardinals. Wait 4 weeks. See what you have. You can get an inflated, like a 3-1 or higher for them to make the playoffs. That's when you want to get invested in them.
And then come playoff time, maybe you do the same thing if they're a dog. But this is the type of team that you want to play them when they're in situations when they're being undervalued, because I do think they can beat anybody in the league in a 1-game situation. Like they show up, we saw them last year play awesome against the Ravens when Baltimore was crushing everybody and they went and took Baltimore to overtime in Baltimore. They can punch up. I just don't think they can do it every week. Like in one game situations, they're capable of raising their level of play. I just don't think week in, week out, they've got enough overall to be a 11, 12 win team, something like that. I feel like, just like you said, maybe they lose a game or two and now they're an underdog when they're playing Miami at home, right? Or they're an underdog when they're playing the 49ers at home because they're 0-2 to start the season. Maybe those are the types of games when I think you want to play the veteran team that can still beat anybody. They just can't do it game in, game out.
All right, real quick. One of the angles, I love people like this. Doesn't say anything about yesterday's baseball. One bet today, Rockies didn't have it. Best angle in baseball is fading pitchers, first start at Mile High. That's what I did. Didn't work out today. Red Sox got the bats going. Lost a bet. It happens. Didn't say anything about yesterday's performance.
Or the next 3 times when that same thing hits, I'm sure it'll be very quiet. It'll be crickets out there, right?
Last one in the division, we're going to the 49ers. 6-1 to win the Super Bowl, plus 250 to win the NFC, minus 195 to win the West, to make the playoffs, minus 525. Yes. No is plus 350. Over under 11.5. Talk to me about the San Francisco 49ers, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, they're a good roster. You go through this team and they were in the Super Bowl last year, but one of their big weaknesses was pass blocking. And I think some of that has to do with Shanahan, with his scheme, that he's able to kind of hide some of their weaknesses on the offensive line because of all the motion, right? Because of all the movement, all the pre-snap stuff. You can have an offensive line that maybe isn't as good as long as they're disciplined and they're not making mistakes. They're not, tripping over their own feet, illegal motion, illegal movement, penalties and stuff like that. They were 24th in blocking grade last year. And it was one of the only places where they really had major, major weaknesses. When you look there, they weren't very good against the run either. What's going to happen with Ayuk? Like, where do we sit right now, Erik? What do you think with the Ayuk situation? He's gone?
I don't think Ayuk's that good. I mean, I wouldn't trade for him. I don't know. I think realistically, he's probably going to get traded. If I had to guess, a couple places that make sense, hypothetically, if the Chargers start off 2-0, they need a wide receiver. They could make a play for him. I'm not a big Pickens guy either. I could see the Steelers making a play for him.
Patriots could use someone, right? Like, but I don't know if he's going to want to go there, but like they need pass catchers for sure.
And I think the dark horse team that no one is really talking about is the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Yeah.
I think we could see the Jaguars because they only brought in they have Kirk at the slot. They drafted Thomas, who's really, in my eyes, not ready for prime time yet. And then they brought in Gabe Davis, who's a field stretcher. Ayuk would give them a little bit more of a traditional chain mover, wide receiver 2 type. Washington, because of his relationship with JD Daniels, is getting a lot of hype. I heard one crazy rumor that said, and if the Raiders do this, like, you just have to get rid of the franchise. Devontae Adams for Ayuk. I mean, like, dude, if you do that,
no,
you're the
my
Raiders.
Gosh. No way.
Great.
No way. No way. So they were, they were through weeks 1 through 11. They had the number 1 defensive grade. Then Hufanga got hurt. They were 14th the rest of the way without him. I'm not saying it was all him, but just the time that he was in, he was a big piece for them. They lost some key pieces: Armstead, Farrell, Hargrave. They did bring in Floyd and Purdy. Like, this will probably be a year where the conversation around him calms down a little bit because he's never as good as anyone wants to say or as bad as anyone wants to say he is. He's above average quarterback and towards the top third. He's 4-2 in playoff appearances. One of those, he got hurt early. So really he's 4-1 in playoff games that he's completed. And so far he's led the league in quarterback win percentage, passing yards per attempt, and touchdown to interception ratio and passer rating. So he's not as bad as anyone tells you, but when anyone tells you that he's like the franchise guy leading a team, trade him to another team that doesn't have Shanahan, McCaffrey, Kittle, Ayuk, Debo, and we'll see if he's going to pick up those guys. Yeah. I just don't think he's either extreme. Much better than anyone ever would have expected him to be as an NFL player coming out of his college career. And the thing that I'm a little concerned about, and maybe this has to do with the way he's been used, and they use him in a smart way, but McCaffrey. So he's averaged 115 scrimmage yards per game in his career. That's nuts. That's nuts just to think about 115 scrimmage yards per game. Last year, he led the NFL in touches and in scrimmage yards. He had a career high 1,459 rushing yards, 21 scrimmage touchdowns. In his 2 full seasons with the 49ers, he's missed 1 game after missing a combined 23 games in his final 2 seasons with the Panthers. So are these hits going to come up at some point? Like, is there an injury coming? Or maybe did they just use him a little bit differently, a little bit better, so he's not getting the same type of hits, or he's not like right up the gut as much as he was before, maybe with Carolina? I don't know. I would be a little bit worried about drafting him season-wide, just thinking about how healthy he's been the last couple years, and you just feel like that may not be the case again. If their defense continues struggling against the run, that's a major vulnerability. Last year, they were 26th in EPA per play defending the run. They fired defensive coordinator Steve Wilkes. He's only with the team for 1 year. They've also deepened the secondary, kind of retooled the defensive line. But the one stat, Erik, that most people are talking about, or you're hearing because it's pretty absurd, they have the largest net rest disadvantage when you compare schedules ever in NFL history. They have a negative 21 days. So they play 8 games where they will have less rest coming there than their opponents. Whereas the Ravens have a plus 16 rest differential. So down the stretch, you're tired, you're banged up, you're beat up, and it's week 10, week 11, week 12. Some of those games that's when that starts to matter, right? Down the stretch like that. So maybe that's when you start to look at them when they have to go on the road. And maybe if they're favored in a game like at Green Bay, you play against them. Or maybe when they go at Buffalo the next week, or at Miami, maybe those are games we attack them because they're a little tired, they're a little beat up at that point of the season. Their over-under is 11.5, and it's actually juiced to the under. They're minus 190 to win the NFC West. I have them at 11-6.
I mean, the main thing with them, you mentioned it, what's going on with the Ayuk. We don't know. Is he going to trade? Is he going to show up for camp? Important to remember, every game the 49ers lost had one thing in common during the regular season. No Debo.
Yep.
So as much as everyone wants to hype up Ayuk, this offense runs through Debo. That's why they're electing to sign him to this big money instead of Ayuk. When we look at Purdy's passing numbers last season, 5th in passing yards, 29th in average depth of target. What does that mean? A lot of stuff is coming after the catch. You mentioned CMC. Stud last season. 417 touches. That's a ton. There has been 23 players in the NFL that have touched the ball that much or more. Only 4 times, one person did it twice, have they gone over their rushing production from last year.
Yep.
Eric Dickerson did it once. Edwin James did it once. Emmitt Smith did it twice. And we look at it, the average production drop of those players has been 465 yards. Offensive line. So, again, I agree with you. I wouldn't draft CMC at all.
And you feel like those are the types of years that you wanted to take advantage of that and parlay it into a Super Bowl win, right? When you have a guy like that stay that healthy and all throughout the season, you have to capitalize on that. So, yeah, it's just tough because they don't look like they're going to lose this division, right?
No.
Like they just, it's so hard to get there, but are they a true Super Bowl favorite? which is what they are right now in the betting. Like they're a co-Super Bowl favorite along with Kansas City. I don't think so. I would say no. I don't. I think their roster right now, as we have it, I still need to see a little bit more. But I mean, they're going to be good. They're going to be like talked about like one of the top 5 teams unless they have massive injuries. I just don't think they're going to be that good to where they're scaring everybody, wiping the doors with everybody they face. Like, I think they're right where their over-under is. I had them at 11-6.
The offensive line, Trent Williams, one of the best. Felicio had a career year last year. And the one thing about the zone blocking scheme that Shanahan does is it's able to Band-Aid a lot of the holes. Prime example, Banks, who was awful last year. Wouldn't surprise me if the rookie Poonen replaces him at some point during the season. Now, if Williams gets hurt for extended time, that is when I'd be worried about this offensive line for the 49ers.
Because he's like the only really, really good play, like great offensive lineman they have. And you hit it perfectly. It's a Band-Aid with the scheme to cover up all the other holes because there's so many bells and whistles and things going on. You're very rarely just lining up and going right at those guys. If we did that, they would be in trouble. So they know they have to kind of hide that, and that builds into Shanahan's scheme and stuff, which is kind of like what we were talking about with the Saints, right? With Kubiak coming in and maybe him being able to get the best out of an offensive line that may not be just the most talented because you can have some of that scheme stuff hide some of the holes.
Armstead, they lost him up front. Will be tough. They brought in Floyd and Collins. You're not going to be able to replace Armstead with those two. On top of that, they have a new DC, and this is where stuff gets interesting with Sorensen. He's never called plays before. And the $1 million question is, what is the secondary going to look like? He's going to, I think, run what they did last year, which is a lot of cover 3. But they brought in Staley, who was the coach of the Chargers, who likes to play man-to-man. So who's going to get the final say? Is Staley going to change what he historically likes to do and fall in line? Or is Sorensen going to say, hey, you know what? This is what you do. We brought you in here to coach the DBs. Let's go man-to-man. Also, one of the things I've constantly read about Staley is his scheme in the secondary is just so complicated. It just confuses a lot of guys. The reason it worked with the Rams is because you guys had so many veterans in that secondary. Chargers had a lot of young. Yep. Hurt them is what is it going to look like in San Francisco? What is he going to do? Another thing, and this is really doesn't make sense to me. They said the main reason they fired Wilkes, who was their DC last year, was how much bad they were against the run. They gave up the 5th fewest yards per carry. You know what I mean? So like when you look at it like that, they weren't really that bad. I kind of like Wilkes. I don't think he gets enough credit. The one thing about them is this is the most questions we've had about them in the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Now, how is that going to transcend in the field? If they lose a couple people due to injuries, I think they're going to fall down. But we can't bet teams to lose because to have injuries. That's just
exactly
the thing.
We cannot play like we're doing. We can propose that, hey, these players, maybe we don't draft them in fantasy because they could be ripe for injuries coming up. But as far as betting on that for a team, that's so hard to do, right? You can't count on players getting injured for why you don't like their team particularly. But they don't seem, their roster wise just doesn't seem as scary top to bottom as it has in the past few years, where you've got those wide receivers, the tight end, the backfield. You've got the defensive line that scares you, the linebackers that scare you, the secondary that scares you. Defensively, there's a lot of questions with the new, with some of the veterans they lost. And just like you were pointing out, they defensive coordinator from last year goes. Now they bring in Staley to deal with some of the defensive,
the back,
the DBs and the defensive. He's going to probably be doing some of the play calling back there. Like you said, what are we going to get? Are we going to get him and his philosophy, or is it going to be more of what San Francisco was doing pretty well. So yeah, I just don't think that their margin of error is so big to where they can just crush everybody. Like if they come out and don't play well, they're going to lose some of those games. And that's why I don't think they're up in the 13, 14 wins, like the real, 2 or 3 loss teams.
And the thing we need to remember is Shanahan made, oh my God, what was that running back's name? Yeah, Shanahan made Matt Breida a thing.
Breida.
He made Matt Breida a thing. Anyone that runs behind a Shanahan offensive line is going to get production in his system. So I don't think losing CMC will hurt. It's the guys in the trenches. You lose Trent Williams for a couple of games.
Yeah.
You lose Bosa for a couple of games. That's when I'd be worried about this team. Now, look, I think they're going to win the West unless something funky happens. To make it back to the Super Bowl, I think that would be a little tough, though. Is it possible?
Sure.
With how bad the NFC is, it's possible,
sure.
But I don't think it's going to happen.
From them being so overvalued, is it worth like betting on them really anything? And that's what's hard. Like, for the one play I have for them, I just went under McCaffrey rushing yards on the season, 1,125 and a half.
Oh, I like that one.
So I went under there. I mean, McCaffrey can get 1,000 yards, and he's another one of those guys that, like, the way that we're talking about this division, right? If down the stretch they have a 2 or 3 game lead in the division because there's just nobody else in this division that's that impressive, how much are they leaning on McCaffrey down the stretch, right? You want that guy to be healthy going into the playoffs. Does he end up sitting out a couple games late in the year or games where you're just not giving him all that run because you don't want all those hits on him come playoff time? So this was the one real wager that I had for them was I went under McCaffrey's rushing yards.
I'll tail you on that one. I'll take McCaffrey under 1125 and a half.
Yeah, that's a big
yards.
Number.
I hate the Lakers. Can you guys just mention all the futures you have? You are betting a summary. So look, my futures, this division, I didn't go that deep.
Me too. Probably like my least.
I took Metcalf over 1,500 yards. Metcalf to win Metcalf to have the most receiving yards, 43-1. Marvin Harrison Jr. plus 600 to win Rookie of the Year. And Christian McCaffrey under 1,125 and a half yards rushing. What were the ones you bet, my friend?
Yeah, I'm going McCaffrey. We just talked about it. I'm not sure. I haven't locked in a future for him yet, but I'm going to be invested in Benson from the Cardinals as someone either in DFS or someone to take at the end of your fantasy drafts. So he's someone I like. I have no problem like picking him along with Connor because as you were pointing out, Connor is someone like that team wants to run the ball. I know they got Harrison too, but they want to try to like be a balanced team. So I have no problem there. With the Rams, I'm also with you on the under Puka. I think under Puka receiving props, you want to hit this year because when Kupp is back, they're just going to be more balanced. It's just going to be a much more balanced team. This isn't me thinking Puka is not a good NFL player. This could be better for the Rams if they're both healthy on the field. They could be a better team because of it. I just don't think you're going to get the production from Puka that you got last year. So it's funny. A lot of people don't like doing this, but I have no problem playing unders on any props or anything at all. And sometimes you just have to do that because you know that when someone had such a great year, they're almost unlikely to have it right back again. It just very rarely does everything go so well back-to-back years, and you're paying for them off of what they did last year. You're negative value already, so I always prefer to go against record-breaking seasons. We saw it with Geno Smith, right? He had that awesome 2022, really regressed in 2023. So the one team that I don't know what to do with of these 4 at all is Seattle, because I really don't know what to expect from the new coach and the coordinators because we haven't seen them in those high-level roles before. So it's not going to be like we expected with the Pete Carroll system. You were saying that maybe Metcalf is the guy to lean on from what you're expecting, right? From how their offense is going to be run.
Yeah, with how it's done with Grubb in the past, X wide receivers heavy. One thing, though, is he's a former O-line coach. So will he lead on the run a little bit more because DeBoer is gone?
Yeah.
I think we're going to go back. I think we're going to see them pass the ball from what I read that is what they're going to do. Cardinals are interesting to me. That's kind of the team I want to get there on. I think I'm going to wait 2 weeks before I lock in a future. Going to get a little bit of an inflated number. Gino, I'd like to thank you for coming on, talking some NFC West. Why don't you tell everyone when your podcast comes out and where they can find that, my man?
Yeah, check out That's What G Said podcast. We're on YouTube. Also, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, I'll be posting a lot more videos there now because with Twitter, we're not able to go live on X quite as much now. So that's fine. We'll post everything to YouTube. If you like and subscribe there, you'll get all the videos. And That's What G Said podcast comes out anywhere you get your podcasts each and every weekend. Really looking forward to the time of the year we're in right now as we're getting closer and closer to the NFL season. We got the Olympics this weekend starting up too, so that should be fun. Always love talking sports with you, buddy. I always appreciate the time and effort over the last 5 years. You become one of my best buds. So that's pretty crazy too. Like as a Laker fan, I love watching AD and LeBron dominating still or like playing really well. I think I saw a cool stat earlier today. Stat leaders for Team USA in the 5-game basketball showcase. Points leader, LeBron. Rebounds leader, AD. Assists leader, LeBron. Blocks leader, AD. Steals leader, Anthony Edwards. Field goal percentage, LeBron. So they've been pretty good. Yeah. I heard you had South Sudan money line, right, Erik? You had that one?
I did not have South Sudan. No. But you know what? You know who's the man behind the South Sudan? Luol Deng. So props to
shout out Luol Deng, former Laker.
Be sure to check out Gino's podcast. We'll be back next week previewing the NFC North with my boy Reed. Make sure to check that out. Make sure to check Gino out, and we'll see all you guys next week.
Good luck, everyone.